War of 1812 is really an interesting war in that we sort of slid into it. Thomas Jefferson left office in 1809, replaced by James Madison. Madison attempted to replace the embargo, which was overturned by Congress, with something called the Non-Intercourse Act, which embargoed trade only to Britain and France, but the United States could trade elsewhere. This still leaves the issue of ships on the open waters that could potentially be stopped by the British for impressment, which was what was happening. There was also a clause in this Non-Intercourse Act that the United States President Madison had the opportunity to lift the embargo to Britain or France if they promised to accept American neutrality rights. France, for its part, made a promise, a vague promise, that it would do so, which led to Madison offering a 3-month window to the British to do the same. In response, the British refused, and the British military started to ramp up the impressment of sailors. This led to Madison asking Congress to declare war on Great Britain in June of 1812, thus leading to the War of 1812. Federalists saw this. Federalists from New England saw this as a terrible idea. They called it Mr. Madison's War. Every Federalist opposed the war. 80% of Republicans supported it, and so the United States declared war. People in the South and the West tended to support the war. People in the North, which had the shipping industry, did not. One of the reasons for the war was that the Southern and the Westerners saw this in terms of honor, that the British were dishonoring or disrespecting, or the American honor was being challenged by the British, and they needed to regain their honor. There's also a feeling that the British were responsible for all the Native American attacks in the West, that from British Canada they were enticing the Native Americans to attack. There's also just simple land lust. The Americans wanted Canada. They assumed that the Canadians there wanted to get rid of the British just as much as the Americans wanted them to become American. They thought there weren't many people there. They felt that the British in Florida were also vulnerable in eastern Florida. So there would be a way to take those territories as well. Again, South and West tended to be war hawks, but New England thought that it would cripple their shipping industry, so they tended to be opposed to the war. There's other good reason to be opposed to the war, and that is that the United States was woefully unprepared for any sort of war. The military was in shambles. At the time the war was declared, there's only about 3,200 soldiers who were ill-equipped. The Navy only had about 16 gunboats, even though their officers were pretty good. By 1813, even after the Congress had authorized the growth of the military, they only had about 18,000 soldiers, most of them Irish immigrants in the army. So the military is unprepared, and financially, just prior to this, the Republicans in Congress had allowed the Bank of America, the Bank of the United States, to let the charter expire. A lot of this had to do with the fact that the Republicans had stock in the local banks, but what this led to was a shambles of currency. All these local banks started to rise up that had their own forms of currency. Then the British blockaded the American ports, which meant that all the tariff revenue from the imports, which was the main source of revenue at this point, decreased incredibly. Republicans in Congress didn't want to raise taxes and face the wrath of their constituents. So both financially and militarily, the War of 1812 we didn't start off in a good spot for it.